The Ember Chronicles, Part 19 of the Galactic War Saga. Dawn of the Eternal. Chapter 1. The False Dawn. The void was no longer still. It trembled like water beneath a storm, rippling with distortions that bent starlight into unnatural shapes. At the heart of that trembling yawned the gate. Its rims stretched jagged across the darkness, a wound bleeding white-violet light, its edges shivering with power. The stars themselves bent around it, warped into spirals as if refusing to shine upon what emerged. From that wound poured ships. They were unlike any Kaelin had seen in decades of war. Their forms were jagged yet fluid, crystalline holes layered like the facets of shattered gems. Light bent across their surfaces, cloaking them in distortions that made the eye ache to look too long. Some were long and spear-like, others wide as leviathans, others only blurs of shifting silhouette. None moved independently, not truly. They shifted as one, like facets of a single living weapon. The leviathan drifted at the edge of the battlefield, her engines glowing faintly as if clinging to defiance. Her hull bore the scars of the rift corridor, fractures sealed with hasty repairs, plating blackened by fire, shielding reduced to a whisper. Yet she stood, scarred but unbroken, her silhouette cutting through the false dawn that bled across the void. The bridge crew watched in silence. Not discipline, not control. Awe. Fear was present, yes, but fear was swallowed by something larger, something deeper. What they saw was not simply enemy. It was revelation. The Ascendant fleet that had once encircled the Orestes colony ship had been a wall of precision and order, a noose woven from discipline. Now that noose shattered, cruisers split apart beneath beams of white fire that burned not with flame, but with erasure. Their hulls dissolved, becoming light, and ash drifting into nothing. Battleships unleashed torrents of plasma and rail fire. Their salvos coordinated, their discipline flawless, and yet their shots curved aside. It was as if the void itself refused their will. The newcomers struck in silence. No calms, no warnings, no boasts. They struck like inevitability given form. Kaelin's hands gripped the command cradle rail until his knuckles whitened. His ribs ached with every breath. His mind still burned with the weight of the Rift Guardian's gaze, but his eyes never left the gate. He had thought himself prepared for anything after enduring the corridor, but he had not been prepared for this. He remembered visions. The obsidian plain beneath the sky, without stars. Chains of light stretching across the horizon. A gate yawning wide, pouring radiance into endless dark. He had thought those images prophecy, symbolic warnings of what might be. Now he understood. They were memory. The Rift Guardian had shown him this. Not as possibility, as inevitability. Beside him, Soraya's face was pale beneath the wash of violet light. Her hands moved across tactical controls, though her eyes never left the viewport. The screens filled with static, readouts flickering as if unable to process what they were seeing. No signatures matched. No design existed in any database. No language accompanied the silence of their weapons. These ships had no place in known space. They were unclassified, unknown, eternal. Jalen leaned against his engineering console, sweat dripping down his brow. His uniform scorched from fires fought below. His fingers moved through power relays, but even he paused now, watching as disciplined Ascendant fleets broke apart like children before gods. The Orestes screamed across comms, her hull rupturing further as Ascendant ships still tried to tear her apart. Civilians wept, shouted, prayed, voices breaking into static. Escape pods streamed like sparks into the void, and the newcomers ignored them. Kaelin's chest clenched. For now, they ignored both the Orestes and the Leviathan. Their weapons consumed only the Ascendant. For now, the Ascendant fought with the precision that had broken empires for centuries. Yet precision meant nothing. Warlords who had boasted of cleansing sectors fell silent as their fleets became ash. Entire wings of ships vanished in waves of light. In minutes, dozens of warships were gone. Those who remained faltered. Discipline fractured. Some turned and fled, their thrusters flaring wild. Others pressed forward still, fanatical, bound by command or madness, and they were unmade in silence. Kaelin's breath came shallow. He felt the Rift Guardian's gaze again, though it was not here. He felt the weight of its judgment pressing against his chest, whispering into marrow. This is what you were tested for. This is why you endured. The Leviathan trembled beneath the gravity waves rippling outward from the gate. Lights flickered, consoles shivered, but she endured. She always endured. Kaelin closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He heard the screams of Zephyros again, the silence of Arcadia, the hollow aftermath of every battle that had carved scars into his soul. Always the same truth. Survival was never the end. Survival was only passage into deeper fire. He opened his eyes again. His voice came steady, though every breath was pain. We press on. The words rippled through the bridge like an anchor. Trembling hands steadied. Hollow eyes cleared. Soraya straightened. Jalen breathed deeper. The helmsman's lips ceased their muttering prayers and moved with clarity. They moved not because they believed in survival, but because their captain believed in endurance. The Leviathan angled her battered hull toward the Orestes. Engines roared weakly, shields flickered, weapons hummed with what power remained. She moved forward, limping but defiant, carrying civilians' last hope. Behind them, the gate widened still, and then something larger stirred. It was not ship, not fleet, not even form. It was shadow and light intertwined, vast and incomprehensible, shifting beyond sight at the heart of the gate. Its presence alone warped the void further, bending stars, collapsing gravity, unraveling light. The crew froze. Their breath caught. Their thoughts trembled. Kaelin's bones ached as though the Rift Guardian pressed upon him again. He felt its judgment not in memory, but in this moment, through this presence. The false dawn was not ships. The false dawn was what came behind them. The Leviathan shuddered onward, scarred but unyielding, carrying her vow into the jaws of gods. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Rift. The Leviathan drifted through silence, her engines a faint growl against the black. The light of the gate still bled across the void behind them, a wound in the fabric of existence, widening with every breath. Its radiance stretched like dawn across the stars, staining everything in hues of violet and silver. The Ascendant fleet was gone. Where once had been precision and order now lay wreckage scattered like ash. Shards of broken hulls drifted, glowing faintly where strange white fire still licked their edges. Entire battleships had been unmade, leaving nothing but dust spiraling into gravitational eddies. The silence they left behind pressed heavier than cannon fire, and yet the Leviathan endured. Her hull was cracked and burning, plating fractured, shields little more than sputtering haze. Systems flickered in and out, half dead, their lights stuttering as though unsure if life remained. Smoke bled from vents, filling corridors with the acrid tang of melted wire and burnt steel. Wounded lay across med bays, overflowing, their cries echoing through decks as medics moved from one to the next with hands trembling from exhaustion. Still she lived. The Orestes hung broken above the barren world, her spine bent, her hull torn wide. She was a wounded giant, still venting flame, her comms filled with the voices of civilians who had not yet realized salvation was impossible. Escape pods drifted around her, scattering into the void like desperate seeds, each carrying fragile lives into uncertainty. The Leviathan moved among them. Her battered hangars opened, shuttles launched, grappling arms extended. Crews in scorched suits reached through fire and silence to pull civilians from broken pods, to haul the wounded aboard, to carry children from airlocks where atmosphere had begun to fail. Every survivor dragged inside was another reminder of why they endured, another defiance against the silence that had claimed so many before. On the bridge, Kaelin watched in silence. His body ached, his ribs screamed with each breath, but he did not move from the cradle. His eyes swept across readouts that flickered between red and black, his mind carrying every whisper of damage as though each were wound to his own flesh. The Rift Guardian's presence still lingered in his thoughts, heavy and unrelenting, its visions clawing at him even as he tried to focus. Ashes on forgotten worlds. Towers burning. Chains of light binding stars. The yawning gate. The obsidian plain where he had stood alone. Leviathan's wreckage behind him. The eternal stirring before him. He clenched his jaw, forcing breath steady. The Guardian's whispers were not fading. They were growing louder. Soraya's voice cut through the quiet, though her tone was subdued, almost reverent. We have secured over 200 civilians from escape pods. Another 300 still adrift. The Orestes is failing fast. If her reactors breach, the remaining cannot be reached. Kaelin's eyes remained on the wreckage. The Orestes had been meant to carry thousands into hope. Now she carried only screams. He gave the order with quiet finality. Push the Leviathan closer. Shields or not, we take as many as we can. The ship groaned as her engines flared, dragging her scarred frame closer to the dying colony vessel. Alarms wailed as stress fractures widened, as shielding sparked against drifting debris, but still she moved. Grapples extended, shuttles surged outward, the work of salvation continuing through fire and ruin. Jalen muttered from engineering, his voice raw with exhaustion. We are bleeding power we don't have. Every burn risks collapse. Kaelin did not look at him. His voice carried the same steel it always had. Then we bleed. The bridge fell silent again, save for the steady hum of failing systems. Minutes stretched into eternity as rescue continued. Dozens more were pulled aboard. Children clutched against the arms of strangers. The wounded dragged across scorched plating. Kaelin's heart weighed heavier with each one. Every life saved was a spark. Every scream lost was a silence added to his soul. At last the Orestes shuddered. Her spine bent further, flames erupting from her core. The reactor's death knell sang across sensors, a pulse of energy building too fast to contain. The Leviathan's shuttles pulled back, grapples severed, as the colony ship tore herself apart. In silence she bloomed into flame, scattering fragments across the void, her light fading into the wound of the gate behind. Kaelin closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Another silence. Another scar. On the bridge, Soraya's hands trembled against her console. Jalen's jaw clenched until blood welled in his mouth. No one spoke. They all felt the weight. Kaelin's mind drifted again into visions. This time he did not resist. He saw chains, not as metal, not as bonds, but as rivers of light stretching across the galaxy. They bound stars, linked systems, tied everything to something vast and unseen. He felt them in his chest, in his bones, in the marrow of existence itself. He saw burning seas and broken wings. He saw faces of his crew among the dead. He saw the gate widening, wider still, pouring light into endless dark. The Rift Guardian's voice pressed against him. Not words, not sound, but presence. Not judgment this time. Demand. Prove you endure. Kaelin staggered back from the cradle, his hand clutching at ribs that burned with pain. For a moment the bridge blurred, the crew's faces shadowed, the alarms distant. Then the vision passed, leaving only sweat dripping down his face and the ache of chains still echoing in his skull. He forced himself upright again. His voice came quiet, raw. Report. Soraya blinked, steadying herself as though she too had felt something pressing upon her. Survivors secured. Over 500 aboard. Civilians scattered across every deck. Jalen added, exhaustion in every word. Hull integrity collapsing. Weapons at less than 20%. Shields gone. We cannot fight again. Kaelin nodded once. The truth was already known. The Leviathan was a broken blade, but broken blades still cut. The crew looked to him, their eyes hollow, their bodies battered, yet still they waited. Always they waited. Kaelin's voice came steady, steel beneath ash. We move forward. The Leviathan turned her wounded frame from the wreckage of the Orestes. Engines flared weakly, dragging her across the stars once more. Behind them the gate widened still, its light staining the galaxy. And Kaelin knew the Rift Guardian's trial had not ended. The echoes would follow. The chains would tighten. The judgment had only begun. Chapter 3. The Fractured Ascendant. The galaxy did not stay silent for long. News of the Meridian Reach bled across the void faster than fleets could move. Rumors whispered first in the outer colonies, then grew louder in markets, in council halls, in command chambers where admirals argued behind closed doors. Entire Ascendant battle groups had been obliterated in minutes, their wreckage scattered, their discipline shattered. The stories grew with each telling. Some claimed the Eternal had come as gods, others as executioners. Some said the Ascendant had fled without firing, others that they had fought to the last man and been erased all the same. The truth mattered little. The empire of the Ascendant was cracking. They had ruled through fear, through precision, through inevitability. They had always been a tide that swept lesser fleets aside. But inevitability had met something older, something hungrier, and inevitability had broken. Kaelin heard the whispers and intercepted transmissions, static choked but sharp with panic. Warlords arguing over survival, generals demanding retreat, fanatical voices crying holy war. None agreed. None could agree. The Ascendant were fracturing. The Leviathan drifted at the edge of a dying system, hidden within a cloud of fractured stone. Her hull was wrapped in scaffolds, her wounded plating being patched by survivor crews who had once fled the Orestes. Fires still burned in her deeper decks. Smoke still seeped through ventilation, and yet the work of repair never ceased. Men and women carried steel, welded plates, rerouted power, fought exhaustion with sheer will. The ship groaned with every shift, her frame scarred beyond recognition, but she lived. Kaelin moved through her corridors in silence. Everywhere he walked, survivors stopped to stare. Civilians pulled from pods bowed their heads, whispering prayers not to gods but to him. Crew members stood straighter when he passed, their hollow eyes steadying for a breath before returning to their work. His presence had become anchor, not by choice but by necessity. He carried their survival as though it were weight chained to his back, and he bore it without pause. On the bridge, SyFy spread intercepted transmissions across the holomap. Dozens of signals from fractured Ascendant fleets flickered in crimson across the stars. Some retreating, some consolidating, some tearing each other apart. One message repeated louder than the rest, a voice drenched in fanaticism. The Eternal are false gods. They are pretenders. We shall burn them with holy fire. We shall cleanse their chains with blood. Another, calmer but no less desperate. We must negotiate. Humanity is nothing. If we offer tribute, the Eternal will spare us. Another still, the voice of a commander who had once destroyed entire colonies with surgical precision. We cannot win. Scatter your fleets. Hide your worlds. There is no strategy left but silence. The Ascendant were no longer one. They were many voices shouting against the dark, each clawing for survival in their own way. Kaelin's jaw tightened as he listened. He had spent half a lifetime fighting them, bleeding against their precision, watching his people fall silent before their advance. Now they fractured like glass struck by a hammer. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt only weight, because fractured enemies were not weaker. They were dangerous in new ways. Desperate, unpredictable, more likely to lash out blindly, to destroy anything near them. And humanity's colonies were near. The Rift Guardian's visions pressed against him again. He saw wings of light unfolding, chains binding galaxies, stars dimming. He remembered the weight of its demand. Prove you endure. Jalen's voice cut through the silence of the bridge, harsh with exhaustion. We can't fight them. Not the Eternal. Not fractured Ascendant. Not like this. The Leviathan is half dead. Every battle will tear her apart. SyFy looked at Kaelin, her eyes reflecting both fear and calculation. But they will come. whether ascendant seeking vengeance or eternal seeking judgment. We cannot hide forever. Kaelin remained still, his gaze fixed on the gate's light, still bleeding faintly across the stars. The galaxy had changed. Every war they had fought before, every silence they had endured, had been prelude. He turned at last, his voice steady. Then we do not hide. We endure. We show them the Leviathan still stands. The crew did not cheer. They did not smile. But their eyes steadied. Their hands stilled. They believed because their captain did. The fractured ascendant sent envoys in the days that followed. Some were desperate, begging for alliance against the Eternal. Others came with threats, demanding humanity surrender its fleets and worlds in tribute. Still others sent no words, only fire. Colonies burned in sudden strikes, desperate warlords clawing for resources, lashing out at the nearest prey. The Leviathan moved between them like a scar blade. She intercepted strikes where she could, her battered frame shielding civilians fleeing burning colonies. She refused alliances with those who had once enslaved them. She endured betrayal, fire, silence. Every scar added to her hull became another proof of defiance. And with each act, her legend grew. Whispers spread of a ship that had survived the Rift Corridor, that had stood against gods and still endured. Whispers of a captain who had seen the dawn of the Eternal and had not bowed. Whispers that became stories, stories that became rallying cries. The Ascendant fractured further. Humanity fractured less. Kaelin did not feel triumph. He felt only the weight of more chains settling across his shoulders. One night, when silence hung across the ship and even the hum of engines seemed faint, he dreamed again. He stood upon the obsidian plain. The Leviathan lay shattered behind him. Before him stretched the chains of light, binding galaxies into patterns he could not name. The Rift Guardian loomed, its wings unfurled, its gaze unblinking. This time it did not press. It did not demand. It only watched. Kaelin raised his head, his voice raw. We endure. The plane cracked beneath his feet, chains groaning, stars trembling. The gate yawned wider, and from it poured the Eternal, their light drowning the horizon. Kaelin woke with sweat dripping down his face, his chest tight, his ribs aching. He stared at the ceiling above his bunk and whispered the vow again. We endure. The Leviathan stirred beneath him, as if she too had dreamed. And across the galaxy, the fractured Ascendant tore themselves apart, their empire breaking into shards. Shards that would cut, shards that would bleed, shards that would drag humanity into fire whether they willed it or not. The war had not ended. The war had only changed. Chapter 4. Chains of the Eternal. The Leviathan drifted through the Reach's edge like a scar across the stars. Her wounds were many, her fires still burning in hidden corridors, but her engines carried her forward nonetheless. Kaelin had ordered silence across comms. No signals that might betray their position, no calls that might draw fractured Ascendant fleets, or worse. The ship floated hidden in the shadow of a gas giant's rings, the debris of shattered moons masking her signature. Yet even here, even in silence, the gate's light reached them. It spread across the galaxy like dawn that could not be stopped. Every report they intercepted told the same story. Wherever the Eternal fleet moved, stars dimmed, colonies fell silent, fleets vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. Wreckage did not always remain. Sometimes entire systems went dark without battle, without warning, their voices cut from the galactic chorus. Kaelin stood at the viewport long after the crew had grown used to the sight. The faint light of the gate painted the void in pale violet, shimmering against the rings that shielded them. His ribs still ached from the trial of the corridor. His skull still burned with echoes of the Rift Guardian's weight, but he stood as though rooted. Soraya broke the quiet with words that seemed torn from the marrow. They are not invaders. They are harvesters. Kaelin did not turn. Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay something sharper than fear, understanding. She spread her readouts across the holomap, though all knew how incomplete they were. Patterns of disappearance. Systems where no wreckage remained. Colonies where every soul was gone. But machines still functioned, power still ran, meals left unfinished on tables. Places silenced not by fire, but by removal. Her words carried weight. Destruction leaves scars. This leaves emptiness. The crew shifted in silence. The bridge was heavy with the truth. This was not war as they knew it. This was not conquest, nor even extermination. This was something deeper, something older. Kaelin's jaw tightened. In his visions, he had seen chains of light binding stars. He had felt them in his bones, stretching across galaxies, pulling all into patterns unseen. He had thought them symbols. Now he wondered if they were truth. The Rift Guardian's demand returned to him, echoing in marrow. Prove you endure. Perhaps endurance was not surviving battle. Perhaps it was surviving harvest. Jalen's voice broke through, ragged with exhaustion. If they can silence whole systems without fire, what hope do we have? What does endurance mean against inevitability? Kaelin turned at last, his eyes hard, his voice steel. It means we endure anyway. The crew fell silent. No one argued. No one could. Days stretched into silence as the Leviathan lurked in the shadow of the rings. Crews worked without cease, sealing wounds, patching plating, rerouting power. Civilians rescued from the Orestes lent their hands where they could, carrying steel, tending wounded, cooking meals in shattered mess halls. The ship lived because they lived. But the Rift Guardian did not leave Kaelin. Each night he dreamed. He walked the obsidian plain again, chains of light stretching beyond horizons. The Guardian loomed, wings unfurled, gaze unblinking. This time its whispers carried weight. Not words, not sound, but meaning pressed in a marrow. Chains bind all. Chains keep the eternal. Chains must be broken or endured. Kaelin woke each time with sweat dripping, his chest burning, his mind screaming. He did not share the visions with his crew. Not yet. The first contact came not from humanity, not from Ascendant, but from silence. A nearby system dimmed. Its star, once bright, flickered as if its light were pulled into unseen chains. The colony there sent one transmission only, a scream across calms of light fading, of skies darkening, of shadows pressing. Then silence. The Leviathan's sensors capture the moment. Not fire, not destruction. The star itself bound, its radiance dimming as though leashed. Soraya's voice was hoarse. They are not destroying. They are chaining. Kaelin's chest tightened. His visions rose again. Chains across stars. Chains binding galaxies. Chains that glowed with the same violet as the gate. He whispered into the silence, not to his crew, but to the Rift Guardian still echoing in him. This is what you meant. The crew did not hear, but the Leviathan seemed to hum beneath him, as though she too had felt the chains settle across her hull. The Ascendant fractured further. Some warlords called for alliance with humanity to fight the Eternal. Others declared holy war, vowing to burn both Eternal and humanity alike in fire. Still others vanished, their fleets slipping into silence. Desperation made them dangerous. Whispers spread of colonies silenced without flame, of entire fleets gone, of chains binding light itself. The Leviathan moved through shadows, carrying civilians and whispers alike. Everywhere she went, stories followed. She had endured the rift. She had faced gods. She had not bowed. Kaelin did not feel like myth. He felt only weight. One night he dreamed again. The plains stretched endless. Chains glowed brighter. The Guardian loomed larger, its wings folding until the horizon vanished. And from the gate poured the Eternal, their ships faceted, their light bending, their silence heavier than screams. This time the Guardian spoke clearer than before, pressing into him until his bones ached. Chains bind all. Chains are law. Chains are eternity. Kaelin lifted his head, his voice raw, his vow unchanged. Then I will endure chains. I will break them if I must. The Guardian's wings flared, its light burning until Kaelin woke with his chest seared by pain. He gasped in darkness, the Leviathan trembling faintly around him, as though she too had dreamed. The next morning, reports came of another colony gone silent. The chains were tightening. Chapter 5. Oaths and Ash. The shipyard was carved into the shadow of a broken moon, its foundations ancient, its walls scarred by wars long forgotten. It had once been a refuge for smugglers, then a haven for deserters, then abandoned to silence when the Ascendant's shadow grew too heavy. Now it lived again, filled not by thieves or deserters, but by survivors. Fleets limped into its shelter, their hulls fractured, their crews broken, their voices heavy with disbelief. The Leviathan entered last, her scarred frame casting a shadow across the docks as she settled into the cradle meant for ships half her size. Sparks rained as engineers scrambled to brace her weight. Her hull groaned like an old warrior lowering himself into rest. Kaelin stood on her bridge as she moored, his eyes watching the fractured remnants around them. Ships of every make filled the cavernous docks. Patrol frigates with holes burned through their spines. Merchant convoys stripped of cargo and pressed into flight. Even a handful of Ascendant deserter craft bearing their ruins scraped away, but their precision still evident. Survivors, all of them. Not an army. Not yet. Only Ash carried by storm. The crew disembarked in silence, their faces hollow but unbowed. Civilians from the Orestes scattered into temporary shelters erected across the docks, their children clutching at hands, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. Kaelin watched them pass and felt the chains of the Rift Guardian heavier than ever. He had endured battle, storm, silence, but this weight was different. To carry lives into the unknown was more than command. It was oath. The council gathered in the central chamber, a circle carved into stone and steel, lit by flickering lamps salvaged from wreckage. Commanders, captains, leaders of colonies, what was left of them, stood arrayed in a circle of shadows. Their voices rose like fire before Kaelin entered. They shouted of the eternal. Some demanded resistance, their fists striking tables, their voices shaking walls. Others demanded alliance, even with the Ascendant, their eyes wild with desperation. Some whispered surrender, their words venomous but cloaked in reason. We cannot fight this. We must submit before chains close completely. Better slavery than silence. Kaelin stepped into the circle, and their voices stilled. His presence carried weight, not of rank but of legend. Whispers had spread faster than ships. Whispers of the Leviathan that had survived the rift, of the captain who had faced gods and not bowed. Whispers had become myth before his boots touched the council floor. He did not speak at once. He let silence weigh heavier than their arguments. He saw in their eyes the fractures already forming, the lines of fear and hunger. He remembered the Rift Guardian's trial, the obsidian plain, the chains stretching beyond horizons. This was another trial, no less dangerous than fire. At last his voice came, low but steady, steel laced with ash. We endured the rift. We endured the Guardian. We endured the gate. We endure still. Submission is not endurance. Silence is not survival. Chains are not life. A voice rose sharp against him, one of the Ascendant deserters who had torn runes from his ship. And what will you do, Captain of Ghosts? Will your broken Leviathan break the Eternal's chains? Will your scars stop gods? Kaelin's gaze turned upon him, unblinking. If gods can bleed, they can be broken. If chains can be forged, they can be shattered. Murmurs spread, whispers of doubt, whispers of hope. Some nodded, their shoulders straightening, their eyes steadier. Others turned away, their jaws clenched in silence. The arguments raged long into the hours. Some commanders swore oaths to Kaelin's vow, pledging their fractured fleets to endurance. Others left the circle in anger, swearing to seek alliance with the Ascendant or to flee into the dark. When the council dispersed, ash remained. Ash of oaths spoken in desperation. Ash of unity born fragile. The survivors were bound not by strength, but by the thinnest thread of belief. Kaelin walked alone through the docks after, his boots echoing against steel. Around him men and women repaired ships with trembling hands, carried supplies through smoke, whispered prayers into the void. He saw in their eyes both fear and faith, both doubt and hunger. He bore it all. In the quiet of the Leviathan's bridge, SyFy stood waiting. Her eyes searched him, heavy with calculation. You gave them words. Words may not be enough. Kaelin's gaze swept across the stars beyond the viewport, the faint shimmer of the gate still staining the void. Words are ash. Ash feeds fire. Fire endures. SyFy did not answer, but she did not look away. That night Kaelin dreamed again. The plains stretched endless, obsidian beneath his boots. Chains glowed brighter, binding stars, binding galaxies, binding him. The Rift Guardian loomed larger than ever, its wings folding across eternity. Its gaze pressed into him, unblinking, unrelenting. Chains bind all. Chains are law. Chains are eternity. Kaelin lifted his head, his voice a vow torn from marrow. Then I will burn eternity to ash. The Guardian's wings flared, and Kaelin woke with his chest seared by pain, the scent of smoke still lingering in his lungs. He sat upright in the dark, his breath ragged, his heart pounding. Beyond the viewport, the gate still shimmered, its lights stretching across the void like dawn that was not dawn. Ash remained. Fire waited. The oath was his to keep. Chapter 6: The Silent World. The colony world of the Los burned in no fire. It lay beneath a pale sun whose light was dimmed, as though bound in unseen chains. From orbit it seemed whole, untouched. Cities gleamed with metal towers. Oceans shimmered with reflected light. Fields stretched green across valleys. At a glance, it was paradise. At a glance, it was alive. But it was not. The Leviathan drifted above the planet, her scarred hull casting a shadow against the atmosphere. Sensors swept across the surface, searching for signatures of life, for signals of power. They found both. Power grids still thrummed. Machines still hummed. Streets still lit with running lamps. But there were no voices, no movement, no heartbeat. Kaelin stood at the command cradle, his eyes locked upon the holomap as silence pressed heavier than alarms ever had. He had seen worlds burned. He had seen colonies shattered, corpses strewn across rubble. He had seen slaughter, but never this. SyFy's voice came quiet, almost reverent. Cities intact, systems functional, life absent. Jalen's hands shook against engineering displays, like they were harvested. The word lingered, venom in the air. Kaelin gave the order with steady voice. Prepare a landing team. The Leviathan descended into the skies of the Los like a scar across paradise. Shuttles broke atmosphere, engines roaring through clouds until they touched down upon empty streets. Soldiers disembarked with weapons raised, their boots striking pavement that echoed too loudly in silence. Kaelin walked at their head. He had seen too much to send others into this and remain behind. The Rift Guardian's visions pressed heavier with each step, whispering chains into his marrow, reminding him that endurance was not won in safety. The city stretched around them, towers unbroken, windows clear. Vehicles sat in neat lines, their engines still warm though no hands touched their controls. Doors stood open with meals unfinished on tables, steam still rising as though frozen in time. Screens flickered with news broadcasts paused mid-sentence. Beds lay unrumpled, and there were no bodies, no blood, no wreckage, no sign of struggle, only absence. Kaelin walked through the streets with eyes hard, each step echoing against stone that should have carried life. His chest ached not from wounds but from the weight of silence. This was not conquest. This was not destruction. This was erasure. SyFy's voice whispered from behind, heavy with dread. This is worse than fire. Fire leaves ashes. This leaves only emptiness. Kaelin did not answer. His eyes caught upon a child's toy lying in the street, its colors bright against the gray. He knelt, his hand brushing the surface, still warm from sunlight. It felt wrong. It felt as though the child had only just released it. Visions pressed against him again. Chains of light binding stars. Chains binding worlds. Chains binding souls. He clenched his jaw until pain replaced whispers. The soldiers fanned out, their voices cutting through calms and fragments. Streets clear. Buildings intact. No resistance. No sign of life. Then one voice broke, trembling. "Sir, you need to see this." Kaelin followed into a square at the heart of the city. A monument rose from stone, carved by hands long before silence fell. It depicted men and women lifting chains broken in their hands, their faces raised in triumph. At its base glowed new light, not of human design. A sigil burned there, carved into stone by something not flesh. Violet lines shimmered, pulsing faintly with the same hue as the gate. Chains unbroken, chains eternal. The soldiers stepped back, their weapons raised though no foe stood. Soraya's eyes widened as she scanned the sigil. It is energy, not paint, not carving. Energy embedded in matter. Kaelin stepped closer. The sigil pulsed in time with his heartbeat, as though mocking him. His ribs burned, the Rift Guardian's weight pressing heavier. Chains bind all. The words were not sound. They were memory. They were law. Kaelin forced his breath steady. His voice came raw, torn from marrow. Not us. The sigil flared once, brighter than sun, then faded to silence again. The team searched further, but they found nothing. No Boethius, no resistance. Only cities still running, meals still unfinished, lives paused mid-breath and stripped away. When the Leviathan ascended again, the planet gleamed beneath them still, whole and untouched but hollow. On the bridge, Jalen's voice came hoarse. If they can take life without fire, they do not need to fight. They can empty us with silence. Soraya whispered, almost to herself. Endurance means more than battle. It means not letting silence claim us. Kaelin's eyes locked upon the gate, still bleeding light across stars. He remembered the Rift Guardian's demand, the obsidian plain, the chains stretching across horizons. He remembered his vow. We endure. The Leviathan turned her scarred hull from the silent world. Behind them, the low shone like paradise. Within it was tomb. Kaelin's chest ached with each breath, not from wound but from vow. The Rift Guardian had judged him. The Eternal had marked him. Chains pressed heavier, but his vow remained. We endure. Chapter 7. Leviathan's Burden. The stars above the silent world had barely faded behind them when the trap closed. The Leviathan limped through dark space, her engines burning weaker than ever, her hull scarred, her crew stretched beyond exhaustion. Civilians filled her lower decks, families crammed into corridors, children clinging to strangers for warmth, their presence turning warship into refuge. The ship's hum was broken by the sound of weeping, the groans of the wounded, the murmurs of prayers whispered into metal walls. Kaelin felt the weight of them all, each life carried upon his shoulders. Each breath a vow, each whisper another chain pressing against his ribs. The alarm came sudden, sharp. Contacts emerging from the void. Crimson markers flared across tactical displays. Ascendant warships, not a fleet, not disciplined ranks, but remnants lashed together in desperation. 3 cruisers scarred by previous battles, their hulls still glowing with unhealed wounds. Half a dozen frigates scattered around them, their engines sputtering as if every thrust was paid in blood. Broken wolves, but wolves still hunted. Soraya's voice came steady despite the weight pressing upon them. Intercept course. They mean to cut us off. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He had expected it. The fractured ascendant were dangerous because they were desperate, and desperate men lashed out at whatever prey lay nearest. The comms lit with their voice. It came harsh, fanatical, dripping with venom. Humanity brought the Eternal upon us. You tore open a gate. You carry their mark. You will be cleansed. Kaelin said nothing. He did not waste words on the desperate. The Ascendant moved fast, their broken formation tightening into a net. Plasma fire streaked through the dark, slamming against the Leviathan's failing shields. Sparks rained across the bridge as systems screamed. Children cried in the lower decks as the hull trembled. Jalen's voice tore through the alarms. Shield collapsing. Hull integrity failing. Weapons at 30%. We cannot fight them. Kaelin's mind burned with the Rift Guardian's trial, with visions of chains and silence. He remembered the plain of obsidian, the vow torn from marrow. We endure, always, but endurance now meant choice. The Leviathan could not hold against the net. To fight was death. To flee was death. To stand risked not only ship but every life aboard. The net closed tighter. Cruisers shifting, frigates weaving, fire raining. The bridge shook as hull plating split. Soraya's voice cut through, sharp and raw. If we turn broadside, we can clear a gap. But the cost. She did not finish. She did not need to. The cost was the ship. Kaelin's grip tightened on the cradle rail. His ribs ached with each breath. His crew's eyes turned to him, hollow but steady. Civilians prayed in the decks below. The Leviathan trembled as though waiting for his command. He saw her as she had been. Proud. Whole. A blade forged for war. He saw her as she was. Scarred. Fractured. Burdened with lives she was never meant to carry. He felt her weight in his chest. Not steel. Oath. The Rift Guardian's voice pressed against him again. Chains bind all. Chains demand sacrifice. Kaelin's chest burned with defiance. His voice came low, steady, unshaken. We opened the gap. Engines roared with fury as the Leviathan turned, her hull groaning as if tearing itself apart. Shields flared weakly against fire that tore plating away. Her forward cannons spat with what power remained, tearing into one frigate and shattering it into flame. Another turned too slow, its hull ripped by secondary batteries. But the cruisers answered. Their fire hammered the Leviathan broadside, rupturing decks, tearing through corridors. Screams echoed across comms. Fires blossomed in lower levels. Whole sections went dark. Civilians clung to each other as smoke filled their hulls. Crew dragged the wounded through burning corridors, sealing bulkheads behind them with hands shaking but unbroken. The Leviathan bled, but she held. Soraya shouted through fire and static. Gap forming. Engines at collapse. One chance. Kaelin's voice rang through the bridge, raw and sharp. Take it. The Leviathan surged forward, her engines screaming beyond design. Hull plating tore loose, shields shattered, weapons dimmed. But she pushed. She clawed through fire and steel, tearing the gap open wider with each shot. One cruiser shifted to block, its weapons charging. But then it faltered. From the void, an eternal vessel drifted. It came silent, crystalline hull shimmering with distortions, its light bending stars around it. It did not fire. It did not move. It only observed. Its presence pressed heavier than fire, heavier than chains, as though it weighed the battle in silence. The Ascendant hesitated. Their fire faltered. Their net loosened. The Leviathan tore through the gap, her engines flaring, her hull screaming. She escaped in the void, scarred beyond repair, but alive. The eternal ship drifted still, its gaze unblinking. Then, without word, without fire, it turned and vanished into the black. The crew breathed shallow, their bodies trembling, their eyes wide. Civilians wept, clutching each other in smoke-filled decks. The Leviathan groaned, her frame bent, her fires still burning. But she endured. Kaelin stood at the cradle, his chest burning with pain and vow alike. He felt the Rift Guardians whisper again, pressing against marrow. Prove you endure. He whispered back, his voice a rasp torn from ash. We endure. Always. The Leviathan drifted into dark, scarred beyond recognition, burden heavier than ever. She was no longer only a ship. She was oath. She was burden. She was symbol. And Kaelin carried her weight until his bones ached with chains. Chapter 8. The First Accord. The Leviathan floated broken through the void, her hull scorched and twisted, her engines dragging flame across dark. Entire sections remained sealed off, their crews entombed in smoke and silence. Yet still she lived, carried forward by the stubborn hands of those who refused to bow. Kaelin stood in the dim light of the bridge, his ribs aching with every breath, his eyes hollow but unbroken. The ship was bleeding. The crew was broken. The civilians pressed into every corridor, whispered prayers through coughing lungs. And still the gate burned in the distance, its violet shimmer staining every star. Soraya's voice cut through silence. Signal detected. Kaelin turned, his gaze sharp. From where? Her eyes narrowed, her hands trembling faintly as she steadied her display. Not ascendant, not human. The pattern is wrong. The crew leaned close, their breaths caught. The signal was not sound, not code, not words. It was resonance, a rhythm pulsing through space, weaving itself into the marrow of every man and woman aboard. It was vibration felt more than heard, meaning pressed in a bone, echoing through blood. Chains bind all. The words were not words, but every mind aboard knew them. They pulsed through the hull, through their lungs, through their dreams carried forward from the Rift Guardian's trial. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He had heard them before. The resonance shifted, layers folding upon layers, meaning pressing heavier. We harvest silence. We preserve eternity. You are marked. The bridge trembled with the weight. Some of the crew staggered, clutching their heads. Civilians screamed in the lower decks, overwhelmed by echoes of chains rattling in their veins. Kaelin stood rooted, his chest burning as if seared from within. His visions of the obsidian plane returned sharper than ever. The chains glowed brighter, the Rift Guardian's wings unfurled across eternity. And beyond, the eternal ships shimmered like faceted wounds in the void. He forced his voice steady, his vow burning raw. Then hear me. We endure. The resonance flared, brighter, heavier, pressing until the hull itself groaned. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the ship itself would tear apart beneath the weight. Then silence. And then an answer. Endurance is rare. Endurance is marked. Endurance may stand. The crew staggered, their eyes wide, their breaths ragged. Jalen whispered through trembling lips. They answered you. Kaelin's gaze burned against the void beyond the viewport. This was not battle. This was not silence. This was contact. The resonance pressed again, softer now, yet heavier with meaning. Chains cannot be broken, but chains may be carried. A cord is offered. Stand where others fall. Witness where others are erased. Endure where eternity harvests. The words tore through marrow, binding themselves into every soul aboard. Some wept. Some trembled. Some bowed their heads as if in prayer. Kaelin clenched his fists, his vow unchanged. We will endure. Always. The resonance dimmed. The eternal vessel shimmered in a view across the void, crystalline hull bending light, its edges shifting as though it were half-dream. It did not fire. It did not advance. It only drifted, a leviathan of light waiting. Soraya's voice came hoarse, almost unbelieving. They have spared us. Kaelin's chest burned as though chains tightened deeper. Not spared. Judged. The eternal ship pulsed once, light rippling across its hull in the same rhythm as the resonance. Then, without word, without sound, it turned and slipped back into dark. The Leviathan floated scarred and broken, but alive. Around Kaelin the crew breathed shallow, their bodies trembling, their eyes wide with the weight of what had been spoken. Onako, not peace, not alliance, a mark, a vow. Kaelin stood silent long after, his mind aflame with the Rift Guardian's visions. The plains stretched endless. The chains glowed brighter. The Guardian loomed larger than ever. And now, beyond it, the Eternal waited, their ships bending eternity, their resonance binding marrow. The Guardian's whisper pressed once more, clearer than it had ever been. Prove you endure. Kaelin's reply was the same as always, torn raw but unbroken. We endure. The Leviathan drifted forward into the void, bearing the weight of chains heavier than steel. She was scarred. She was broken. But she was marked now, no longer prey, no longer nameless. She carried the first accord upon her hull, upon her crew, upon every soul who drew breath inside her. And in silence, in pain, in fire they endured. Chapter 9. Fire in the Void. The void was never silent for long. The Leviathan drifted scarred and trembling, her hull still cracked from the ascendant trap, her crew still shaking from the resonance of the Eternal's first accord. They patched bulkheads with trembling hands, carried wounded through smoke-filled corridors, whispered prayers against walls that creaked with strain. They endured, but they were not whole. Kaelin stood at the cradle, his eyes hollow yet burning. The resonance still echoed in his marrow, the words etched deeper than scars. Accord is offered. Stand where others fall. Witness where others are erased. He carried it heavier than steel. He carried it like chain. But the void shifted again. Sensors flared. SyFy's voice cut sharp. Multiple contacts. The displays bled red with markers. Ascendant warships. Dozens. More than remnants. More than scraps. A fleet torn ragged but still vast. Its wings spread across stars like predators drawn by blood. The crew's breath caught. Civilians pressed close to bulkheads, whispers of prayers rising. Jalen's voice trembled as his displays fed numbers into air. Too many. More than we can face. Kaelin did not look away. He watched the fleet with unblinking eyes, waiting, calculating. They did not fire. They did not move. Not yet. Then the comms lit. Two voices overlapped, sharp and venomous, each screaming louder than the other. One called for vengeance, for purging humanity's stain, for cleansing all who bore the Eternal's mark. The other called for survival, for alliance with whatever power endured, for chains if it meant life. Their words tore across channels, desperate, wild, fractured. The Ascendant were not united. They were burning. On the tactical displays, ships shifted. Cruisers turned on cruisers, frigates fired upon frigates. Beams of plasma slashed across the void as fleets, once bound by law, turned teeth upon one another. Explosions tore through dark, scattering wreckage and flame. A civil war ignited before the Leviathan's eyes. The bridge shook as stray fire scraped across shields already cracked. SyFy's voice cut cold. We are inside their war. Kaelin's hands gripped the cradle rail until his knuckles whitened. The Leviathan could not fight. She could not flee, but she could endure. He gave his orders steady. Hold course. Shields front. Weapons only if threatened. The crew obeyed, their hands moving with discipline, though fear pressed heavy. The ship drifted through chaos like stone caught between fires. Around them, the Ascendant slaughtered themselves. Whole wings broke apart in fire, debris scattering across the void. Fanatics screamed oaths as they rammed their ships into those who refused their call. Survivors fired upon survivors, their discipline shattered by desperation. The Leviathan drifted through the storm, her scarred hull lit by flashes of flame. Civilians cried out in lower decks as explosions shook the hull. Smoke filled more corridors. Engineers dragged bodies from collapsed bulkheads, their lungs burning with ash. Still they worked. Still they endured. On the bridge, SyFy's eyes narrowed. They see us. Kaelin turned. One cruiser broke from the melee, its hull glowing with scars, its weapons charging. Its comms flared with fanatical venom. Humanity bears the mark. Humanity, open the gate. Humanity will burn. Weapons locked. Kaelin's voice rang raw. Brace. The Leviathan's battered shields flared as fire slammed against them, plating splitting, alarms screaming. The crew fought to stabilize, dragging energy from broken systems, shunting power to failing barriers. Kaelin's ribs burned, the Rift Guardian's whispers pressing heavier. Chains bind all. Chains demand sacrifice. His voice came sharp, steady. Return fire. The Leviathan roared. Her cannon spat with fury, tearing across void. The cruiser answered, its weapons burning hotter, its engines pushing closer. Fire met fire, steel met steel. The two ships dueled in the chaos of civil war, predator against predator, both scarred, both desperate. The Leviathan groaned as hull plating split. The cruiser shuddered as fire carved into her spine. Then another Ascendant ship broke formation, targeting the same cruiser. Not to save the Leviathan, to destroy their own. Plasma tore through the cruiser's core. It ruptured in fire, fragments scattering like ash across void. The second ship drifted past the Leviathan, its comms silent. It did not fire. It only turned back into chaos, tearing into its own kind again. The crew breathed shallow, their eyes wide with disbelief. Jalen whispered hoarse. They're destroying themselves. Kaelin's gaze remained unblinking. Not destroying, consuming. The war raged on, burning brighter, tearing larger. Ascendant ships ripped each other apart, their voices screaming oaths of vengeance, oaths of survival, oaths of silence. Fire spread until void itself seemed aflame, and the Leviathan drifted through, scarred, battered, her civilians clinging to bulkheads, her crew holding their stations with trembling hands. She endured, but Kaelin's chest ached heavier with each breath. The Rift Guardian's vision pressed sharper. He saw chains binding not only him but all. He saw the Eternal watching from shadows, harvesting silence from war. He saw the Ascendant burning themselves in fire, their voices tearing each other apart. And he knew, this was not only battle, this was test. The Eternal had spared them to witness, to endure where others fell, to walk through fire where others consumed themselves. Chains bind all, Kaelin whispered raw, his voice a vow torn from marrow. Then we endure, always. The Leviathan drifted scarred through the burning void, bearing lives in her hull, bearing oath in her captain, bearing fire heavier than steel. Around them, Ascendant slaughtered Ascendant. Silence spread across stars. Eternity waited in shadows. And still they endured. Chapter 10. Ashes of Oaths. The fire of the Ascendant war still burned behind them, stars littered with wreckage, screams scattered into silence. The Leviathan limped through black beyond, engines stuttering, hull ruptured in a dozen places. Her decks were filled with smoke, her corridors with wounded, her air with whispered prayers. Kaelin stood hollow at the cradle, his ribs aching, his blood burning with chains unseen. He had endured fire, silence, resonance, and judgment. He had carried civilians through slaughter, carried his crew through ruin. But now he felt it pressing heavier than ever, the weight not of steel or flame, but of oath. The Rift Guardian's voice echoed in marrow. Chains bind all. Prove you endure. The Leviathan groaned with every breath. She could not take more. Yet more was coming. Sensors bled red again. Soraya's voice broke sharp. Contact. The void tore open. The gate flared brighter than ever, its violet light spilling across systems, bending stars into fracture. From it poured not one eternal ship, nor a handful, but an armada. Crystalline leviathans shimmering, their hulls bending light, their presence pressing into bone. Dozens, hundreds, their numbers uncountable, their silence deafening. The bridge froze. Crew staggered, some falling to knees, some whispering prayers. Civilians in lower decks cried out, children clinging to parents, air heavy with dread. The resonance came again, stronger than ever, pulsing through hull and flesh alike. Chains cannot be broken. Chains must be carried. A cord is offered. I called de mon pouf. Kaelin's chest burned as though his heart were fire. He had endured trial. He had endured silence. He had endured war. And now the Eternal demanded more. His voice rasped raw. What proof? The resonance shook hull and bone alike. Choose. Ship or chain. Flesh or vow. One must burn. The bridge trembled. The crew turned to him with wide eyes, horror dawning. They understood. The Leviathan was not just ship. She was oath. She was symbol. She was burden. The Eternal demanded sacrifice. Soraya's voice tore hoarse. They want you to choose. Kaelin's chest shook with breath, chains burning in his ribs. He looked upon the Leviathan, scarred and bleeding. He looked upon his crew, hollow but unbroken. He looked upon civilians clinging to walls, children clutching toys, eyes wide with fear. And he saw the Guardian's plane of obsidian stretching endless. He saw chains binding stars. He saw wings unfurled across eternity. He saw judgment. The resonance pressed heavier. Choose. The ship shook as though gripped by unseen chains. Bulkheads split, alarms screamed, civilians wailed. The Eternal Armada drifted silent, waiting, watching. Kaelin's breath tore ragged. His vow burned raw. We endure. He pressed the command cradle. The Leviathan's engines flared one last time, burning hotter than they had strength for. Her weapons roared in defiance, not at the Eternal, not at enemies unseen, but at the void itself. She screamed into eternity, fire tearing through her veins, hull splitting wider. Crew screamed as systems ruptured. Civilians wept as decks collapsed. The ship bled fire into space, her roar echoing across eternity. Kaelin stood unflinching, chains burning, vow unbroken. We endure. Always. The resonance shifted, sharper, heavier, brighter than stars. Then endure without ship. The Leviathan's core ruptured. Fire consumed her heart. The ship that had carried them through war, silence, and fire tore apart in a blaze brighter than suns. The crew was thrown into flame. Civilians screamed in a vacuum. The bridge shattered around Kaelin as chains burned deeper into his flesh. And in the instant of collapse, in the instant of fire and silence, the Eternal Armada shimmered closer. Light swallowed them all. Kaelin felt his body tear, his ship die, his oath break upon fire. Yet his vow remained. We endure. The light consumed. The world ended. And then he woke. Not aboard a ship. Not in fire. Not in void. But upon the plain of obsidian again, chains stretching endless, stars bound in silence. The Rift Guardian loomed vast, its wings unfurled, its gaze burning into him. Behind it, shadows moved. The Eternal Armada bent in shapes beyond comprehension, their resonance pressing heavier. The Guardian's voice thundered across eternity. Now prove it. Don't forget to subscribe and see how this 20-part series comes to an end.